The city never slept, but Louis did. Just not much, not well. He lay flat on his back most nights, staring at the cracked ceiling of a cold hotel room in Manhattan's Lower East Side. A gun rested under the thin pillow, loaded, safety off, always. The world thought he had everything: money, power, men who'd kill for his name. But Louis hadn't really slept in over a decade. Not the kind of sleep that makes you forget the world, not the kind that's soft, not since the first man went down and his name started to move through alleyways like smoke. It wasn't always like this. He was born poor, real poor. New York in the 1890s wasn't kind to kids like him. Small, Jewish, skinny, quick with his hands, the son of immigrants. A boy who watched too many men bow their heads just to survive. His old man ran a small shop that barely made rent. And his mother, she worried more than she prayed. Louis didn't want that kind of life. He was tired of being small, tired of watching his family shrink themselves to fit a world that didn't care. So he changed the rules. He left school early, got caught up in petty theft, pockets here, crates there. He was smart though, sharp in a way the other boys weren't. Quiet, calculating. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people leaned in. By the time he was 17, he was running crews, not big ones, not yet. Just enough to feel control, just enough to make a few bucks and feel the rush of knowing someone would take a fall if he gave the word. They called him Lepke. No one remembers why. Maybe because he always looked clean. Maybe because he didn't shout like the other thugs. He handled things soft, gentle voice, cold eyes. You never saw him coming, and you never heard him raise his tone. He started taking control of the garment industry next. Sounds boring, right? Clothes, buttons, but that's where the real money was. Every factory needed protection. Every delivery had to be watched. Union bosses, truck routes, materials. He got his hands in all of it, and people let him. Because Louis didn't just threaten, he delivered. He built something most gangsters never had, a system. You paid him once, you stayed safe. No one broke your machines, no one stole your orders. You missed a payment? Well, someone might find your warehouse burned to the ground, or worse, someone you loved might not come home. Still, Louis wasn't sloppy. He hated loud jobs. He didn't drink much, didn't do drugs, didn't show off. He lived like a businessman. But he wasn't. Behind the suits and clean fingernails, he was something else, something darker. By the early 1930s, Louis wasn't just another gangster. He was the man who ran Murder Inc., the enforcement arm of the syndicate, a secret group of killers who handled hits coast to coast. No face, no name, just silence, blood, and money. Louis never pulled the trigger himself, not often. That was the key. He built distance between his name and the dead. But those who followed him, they knew who they were killing for. He thought that made him safe. He thought wrong. You wouldn't know Murder Inc. by looking at it. No neon signs, no gang colors, no fingerprints. That was the point. To the outside world, it didn't exist. But inside the underbelly of New York, it was as real as the gutters that swallowed blood on a rainy night. And Louis? He was the architect of it all. He never called it that, though. Murder Incorporated. That name came later from newspapers and frightened men who needed something to call the beast that had no face. For Louis, it was simply the enforcement arm. Enforcement, that was his word. Cold, clean, businesslike. He ran it like a boardroom. Every contract killing was logged, priced, debated. There were rules, structure, no freelance jobs, no emotional hits. You didn't kill someone because you didn't like them. You killed them because they broke the order, because they took without asking, because they betrayed the code. The guys who carried it out? They weren't soldiers. They were tools. Quiet men with hard eyes. Most of them were Jewish or Italian, just like Louis. Some came from the Bronx, others from Brooklyn or Jersey. One of them, Abe, had a thing for ice picks. Another, Frankie, liked using piano wire. Then there was little Rube, the guy no one ever saw twice. He smiled like a kid, but his body count was whispered in the dozens. Louis didn't pick them for muscle. He picked them for silence. For obedience. They weren't his friends. They didn't eat at his table or shake his hand unless he offered it first. That's how he kept his hands clean. He built a layer of distance between himself and the triggermen. That was the brilliance of it, the insulation. Louis could sit in his office sipping coffee while someone disappeared in a basement across town, and no one could ever tie it back to him. No phone calls, no letters. Instructions were passed mouth to ear like a secret prayer. Sometimes they didn't even use names, just descriptions. The guy who talks too much on 10th, or the one that switched unions without permission. That's all it took. A word, a nod, and someone was gone. The other bosses envied him. They were loud, sloppy. They'd parade around nightclubs like kings, throw parties with champagne fountains and dancers and cigars. Louis stayed out of the light. He let them burn themselves out while he kept building, brick by brick. The garment district was his first empire, but he didn't stop there. He moved into shipping, trucks, ports, unions. Anywhere there was movement, Louis found a way to tax it. If you needed your goods to arrive safe, you paid him. If your workers needed to stay quiet, you paid him. If someone tried to cut a corner or skip out, they vanished. No trace. For years it worked. Even the police didn't know where to look. And the ones that did? They were already on his payroll. Everyone knew someone who owed Lepka a favor. But trust is a funny thing. It breaks slowly, not with a bang, not with a gun, but with doubt. And Louis, for all his control, was not immune to it. It started with Dutch Schultz. Dutch was wild, another Jewish gangster, but not like Louis. Loud, emotional, reckless, he ran Harlem like it was his own personal playground. Numbers rackets, liquor, muscle, all of it soaked in his ego. Louis didn't like him. He respected the money, sure, but Dutch talked too much, made too many enemies. One day, Dutch got it in his head to kill Thomas Dewey, the new special prosecutor gunning for organized crime. Dewey was making a name for himself. Young, fearless, the kind of man newspapers loved. And Dutch hated that. He called a meeting, a big one. All the top bosses came, even the ones who usually stayed away. Dim lighting, smoke in the air, men shifting in their chairs. Dutch stood in front of them and said it plain. Dewey's gotta go. I don't care if he's a Fed. I don't care if he's protected. We kill him or we all go down. The room went cold. No one wanted to touch a government man. That crossed a line even criminals knew not to mess with. You killed a made guy, maybe. A cop. If you had no choice. But a prosecutor with federal eyes behind him? Suicide. Louis didn't speak right away. He just sat there, arms folded, watching, letting Dutch sweat. Then he said it, soft, calm, deadly clear. You killed Dewey, we all hang. The vote went against Dutch. And not long after, Dutch Schultz was shot in a Newark tavern, slumped over a urinal, bleeding out onto the floor while muttering gibberish no one understood. Some say Louis ordered it. Quietly, professionally. Others say the commission handled it. Either way, Dutch was gone, and the world took notice. But so did the feds. The whispers started. Murder was happening with too much precision. Too many people were dying in too many cities with the same pattern. No witnesses, no clues, no mistakes. Dewey started digging harder. He didn't have names at first, just threads. And then, one day, a thread snapped. His name was Abe Kid Twist Reyes, a contract killer, one of Louis's best. He had ice in his veins and a Bible full of sins. He got caught on a small charge, barely a footnote in the paper. But the heat was rising, and the prisons were getting colder. They offered him a deal. Testify and you live. Stay silent and rot. Rails cracked, not all at once. At first, just little things, a few names, a location, a timeline. But the deeper they pressed, the more he gave. He laid out the entire structure of Murder Inc. name by name, killing by killing. And Louis, he was right there at the top. It wasn't just rumors now, it was testimony, first-hand accounts, dates, bodies. Louis had built a fortress, but one weak voice undid it. He went into hiding, not flashy, not desperate, just gone. A ghost in his own city. They say he moved between apartments in Brooklyn, Queens, even out to Jersey sometimes. He still shaved every day, still wore a pressed suit. But he was looking over his shoulder now, sleeping even less. Even the gun under his pillow didn't help. And the worst part? He knew it was only a matter of time. In those days, you could smell fear in the mob world. Guys who used to joke around corners now stayed quiet. No more toasts in clubs, no more backslaps and big promises. Everyone was watching everyone. And Louis, he wasn't just a name anymore. He was the hunted. Dewey wanted him. The press wanted blood. And the families, they weren't going to protect a man who brought this kind of heat. He wasn't an asset anymore. He was a liability. He thought about leaving the country, South America maybe, or Sicily. But where would he go? He'd built his life on structure, on control, on silence. Out there, in some jungle or mountain, he'd be just another man running from his past. Louis wasn't made for that. He wanted to control the ending. So, he made a call. Through back channels, through lawyers, through the men who still owed him something. And one cold morning in 1939, Louis Lepka Buchalter surrendered. Not in some alley, not in handcuffs, no. He walked into the arms of J. Edgar Hoover himself, clean-shaven, tailored coat, eyes forward. A gangster who turned himself in like a businessman closing a file. It was front-page news. The mighty Lepka, the untouchable, now in federal custody. But the real storm hadn't even started. He thought he could bargain, thought they wanted information, thought he still had leverage. But Dewey? Dewey didn't want deals. He wanted a body. And for the first time in his life, Louis realized no amount of silence could save him. A man knows when he's lost the room. When Louis walked into that federal building to surrender, he still had this sliver of belief. Maybe not hope, not in the way regular men feel it, but something colder. Something strategic. He thought the game still had a few more moves. He had made the decision carefully, like everything else. No panic, no grand exit, just paperwork, handshakes, and the eyes of men who once feared him now looking too long, too curious. He wasn't surrendering to beg. He was surrendering to negotiate. That was the word in his head. Negotiate. Because power doesn't vanish overnight. It bleeds slow. It settles into the cracks of old friendships, into the memory of fear. And Louis, he had built too much to believe it could all just collapse. But the second the door shut behind him, he knew. The government didn't want a meeting. They wanted a message. They threw him in the tombs, the holding pen for men like him. Big names stripped down to numbers, cold cell, caught like a piece of wood, and food not even rats would chase. He didn't complain. He was too proud for that. But it showed in his face. No suit, no ring, no tie. Just a plain beige shirt and pants that didn't quite fit, and a stare that didn't blink much. His hair grayed faster in there. His back stayed too straight, like it was holding up the last piece of dignity he had left. He thought they'd come talk, ask for names, ask for arrangements. They didn't. All he got was silence and eyes. Eyes from guards who stared too long, like they were waiting to see the monster behind the name, like they wanted to be the ones to say they saw Louis Lepka Buchalter at his weakest. And then came the papers. Multiple indictments, labor racketeering, conspiracy, murder, tax evasion, obstruction, the works, one after another, state and federal. Different jurisdictions, each one sharper than the last. It wasn't about locking him up. It was about burying him alive. And sitting on that cot under flickering yellow lights, Louis finally asked himself the one question that men like him avoid for most of their lives. Who's left that would still lie for me? The names started falling faster than bodies ever had. Albert Anastasia, the mad dog with the cold smile, stepped back. Lucky Luciano, already locked up in Dannemora, sent word through layers of men. Don't touch that case. Even Meyer Lansky kept his distance, too smart to sink with a man who'd made the front page, too calculating to bet on a ship that had already hit the reef. They had all eaten well off Louis's empire. They'd built fortunes beside him. But now, they couldn't remember his number. Couldn't recall their cut. Loyalty in that world had a short shelf life, and Louis was expired goods. But the worst part wasn't the silence from the top. It was the noise from the bottom. Testimonies, Page after page, men he'd once trusted, men who shook his hand and took his orders without blinking, started talking. Not just about crimes, but about him, how he gave the nod, how he handled payments, where he sat in meetings, the words he used: Abe Rayless, Sholem Bernstein, Tootsie, Pittsburgh Phil, Happy My Own. Each name carved a little more flesh off Louis's legacy, Rayless especially. The guy was a walking confession booth. He gave everything. He sang like a man trying to buy back his soul with each word. Worse, he was believable, dramatic, not crazy, just methodical, like he'd kept it all cataloged in his head for years. And when he spoke in court, clean shirt, nervous hands, that broken boy look, juries leaned in. Louis listened to every word from behind glass, jaw tight, eyes dead. He didn't flinch when Reels named him, didn't blink when they described how orders went down. But inside, something was tearing. Because he didn't just lose the war. He lost the narrative. He wasn't the silent businessman anymore. He wasn't the organized mind behind a system that ran clean and efficient. He was now painted as a coward in a suit, too soft to pull the trigger, too smart to get dirty, but still responsible for dozens, maybe hundreds of deaths. They made him a symbol, and the world was hungry for it. He had one shot, the Supreme Court appeal. Louis sat in that courtroom like a statue, listening to lawyers dance around the legality of his conviction. See, the first charge that stuck wasn't for all the bodies. It was for labor racketeering, money, union control, extortion, the soft crimes that wore business suits and walked through government hallways. He was sentenced to 14 years, not life, not death, and for a second, just a brief, cruel second, he thought he could ride that sentence out, thought maybe he could survive the years, get out gray, but breathing. Then came the murder trial. Dewey wanted him on federal charges, but the state of New York had its own hunger. They charged him with ordering the murder of Joseph Rosen, a small-time garment contractor who'd defied the syndicate years earlier. They said Louis signed off on it personally. No fingerprints, no witnesses, just Reles' word. And that was enough. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. And with that came the only sentence that mattered. Death. By electric chair. Louis didn't cry, he didn't scream. He just nodded once, like a man finally hearing a song he'd known was coming. But behind that nod was something else. A slow, quiet collapse. Because even if you prepare for it, even if you know death is the price of power in this world, it still hits different when the calendar becomes your executioner. They moved him to Sing Sing, up the river. Death row, one narrow bed, one slot in the door, one bulb above his head that stayed on all night. He couldn't see the sky anymore, only walls and time. Time moved like molasses there. Days bled into nights. Meals came and went without taste. The guards called him Mr. Buchalter at first, some out of respect, some out of sarcasm. Eventually, they just called him Lou. The silence, once his weapon, was now his prison. He spent most nights staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the same way he did when he was young and broke. Only now, he wasn't building an empire. He was waiting to be erased. They offered him a priest. He declined. They offered him a deal. Confess, talk, help the state. He said nothing. He didn't believe in redemption, not for men like him, and he sure as hell didn't believe in begging. But he did write. Not a lot, just a few letters. One to his wife, simple, cold. One to his lawyer, business. One to his old associate who never answered. They were short, dry, like memos. The kind of writing a man does not to be heard, but to leave something behind. Not legacy, just proof of existence. Proof that he was more than the mugshot, more than the headlines, more than the wires and switches and smoke that were coming. The final days were quiet. They always are. He barely ate, didn't speak unless spoken to. His hair thinned out. His skin turned pale, like wax left in a drawer too long. But his eyes stayed sharp, even in the end. Louis didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't flinch. On March 4th, 1944, they came for him. 2 guards, 1 chaplain, 1 cold hallway. He walked steady. His last words weren't dramatic, weren't even bitter. Just a quiet sentence muttered under breath, "I built something. You tore it down. That's how it goes." And then he sat. They strapped him in. And when the switch was pulled, the man who once ran Murder Inc., or the man who lived in silence, dealt in whispers, and built a kingdom from fear, died without a sound, just like he lived. Power doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't go out like a light. It fades, slowly. Like the last cigarette glowing in an ashtray no one touches anymore. Like a once feared name being spoken without flinching. For Louis, the fade began years before the headlines ever printed his face. Before Murder Inc. collapsed, before the arrests, before the courtroom whispered, "Death." It began with something small, something he never expected to lose. Control, not over money. That part was still steady. He was still skimming off the top of every truckload of union shipments, still taking his slice of garment factory payrolls, still keeping crooked foremen in line with a nod and a phone call. But the men, they were changing. They started to act like they didn't need him, like maybe he was just another suit, another aging boss who didn't understand the new world being carved up behind his back. It showed in the eyes. The ones who used to glance away when he walked in now held their gaze a little longer. The ones who jumped to stand now took their time. Loyalty wasn't fading yet, but respect? That was starting to rot around the edges. And Louis felt it. He didn't say much, but he noticed everything, always had. The whispers behind doors, the meetings he wasn't invited to, the way Albert Anastasia talked more freely. Like a man weighing his chances without asking permission. Even Bugsy Siegel, flashy and wild, had started moving money around without looping Louis in. Gambling joints in Vegas, real estate in California, things that used to go through Lepke's office now flowed somewhere else. Louis didn't confront them. That wasn't his style. He waited, watched, took mental notes like a banker checking numbers at midnight. But inside, the doubt was there. It scratched at the back of his skull at night, in that thin hour between sleep and thought. The one he hated. The one that came after the bourbon wore off, and the world got quiet enough for ghosts. There was one moment, small, almost forgettable, that told him things were slipping. It was a sit-down in a butcher shop in Bensonhurst. Cold day. Snow sticking to boots, steam rising from the coats of men gathered in a back room with hooks on the walls and sawdust on the floor. 3 capos from different crews. A numbers dispute. Nothing unusual. Louis was called to mediate. That was normal. He was the neutral man, the one whose word carried weight without needing a gun behind it. But when he walked in, nobody stood. That silence hit harder than any insult, harder than bullets. They looked at him like he was just another seat at the table. And when he spoke, clear, quiet, precise, the younger capo, a greasy kid from Red Hook named Vinny, interrupted him. "With all due respect, Mr. Buchalter, this ain't the old days. We don't need to do it that way no more." It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it, like Louis was a relic, a record player in a room full of radios. Louis didn't respond, just nodded once, short, cold. He left 10 minutes later. The next day, Vinny's cousin got shot outside a laundromat in Crown Heights. Not killed, just clipped in the leg. Message received. But even as he sat in his office that night, watching the snow hit the window, Louis knew. That was a warning shot, but not from him, from them. They weren't afraid anymore, not enough. He started checking the locks more often after that, started sleeping lighter, waking up to every sound. The gun under his pillow wasn't new, but now his fingers curled around it even in his dreams. He didn't trust the phone lines, didn't trust the club runners, didn't trust the bankers. Even some of his closest men, Mendy, his longtime associate, started keeping things vague, started showing up late, started making excuses about missed shipments and union meetings that got moved. Louis never asked twice, he just watched. One night, he followed Mendy, had one of the boys tail him from a safe distance. They saw him meet with a man from Lansky's circle, a quick conversation, a passed envelope, a handshake. 2 nights later, Mendy walked into Lewis's office with a fresh bruise under his eye and a new tone in his voice. Humble, quiet, shaky. He didn't explain. Louis didn't ask. Some lessons still held. But that loyalty? It wasn't earned anymore. It was purchased, and purchased loyalty expires the second the bills stop coming. Behind the power, behind the empire, there was always one truth Louis didn't share with anyone. He didn't sleep. Not really. He hadn't for years. He'd lie down, shut his eyes, let the dark come. But his mind stayed busy, replaying faces, orders, regrets. And lately, one face came back more than the others. Joseph Rosen. He wasn't a big name, not a rival, just a man with a stubborn streak and a mouth that wouldn't stay shut. He ran a small trucking business in the garment district, refused to pay protection, refused to play ball, took his case to court once, lost, came back again, kept filing complaints, kept talking, until one day he disappeared. The official line was that he'd moved away. Family drama, some quiet deal, but everyone knew the truth. Murder, Inc. handled it. Louis never confirmed it, never denied it either. He gave the nod once to someone who gave a nod to someone else, and Rosen was gone. That was years ago. But now in the quiet hours, he saw Rosen's face. Not the man himself, just the moment, just the decision. It didn't feel powerful anymore. It felt like the first thread that unraveled the whole sweater. By 1938, the press was circling. Whispers turned to stories. Stories turned to questions. Questions turned into Dewey. Thomas E. Dewey was young, polished, smart, and hungry. He saw himself as the man who'd clean the city, and to do that, he needed a name that would shake the ground. He chose Louis. Not Luciano, not Anastasia. Louis. Because Lepke had become something symbolic, the business gangster, the one who murdered from a desk, who ran operations like a CEO, who turned blue-collar industries into blood-stained revenue machines. Dewey wanted to cut the snake's head off in public, and Louis felt the storm coming. The papers called it a manhunt. Louis called it retirement. He vanished, not in a panic, not with a bang, just quietly. He stopped going to the clubs, stopped showing up at meetings, stopped calling in favors. Some say he moved through a dozen safe houses in the first month: Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island. Sometimes he stayed in a small apartment above a tailor shop, sometimes in the back room of a kosher deli, once, allegedly, in the servants' quarters of a senator's summer home. No one knew for sure. That was the point. He left behind the illusion of control and became a ghost. But ghosts don't build empires. They just wait to be forgotten or hunted. And in those final months on the run, Louis was already dead in a way. Not publicly, not legally, but internally. Because every man who ever shook his hand now had a choice: distance or destruction. And slowly, the calls stopped. The money slowed. The messages grew cold. One by one, the empire he'd built stopped returning his shadow. He knew what was coming. That's why he turned himself in, not to confess, not to clean his soul, but to control the one thing he had left: his exit. Because no matter how big you get, no matter how many men you put in the ground or how many dollars you touch, the street never forgets. And it never forgives. I never called him Lepka, not once. To me, he was always Mr. Buchalter. The first time I saw him, I was 19, standing outside a factory off Canal Street in the rain, holding an envelope that wasn't even mine. Just a runner back then, a nobody. He came out the side door, sharp hat, clean suit, no umbrella, and nodded once as he passed me. That was it. A nod. But it felt like a spotlight hit my chest. The man had presence, not loud, not showy, just still. Still in a way that made you want to stand straighter, made you careful about how you breathed. Started working for him proper a few weeks later. Not muscle, not numbers, errands, quiet tasks, fixes. He liked things quiet. He once told me, "Noise is what gets men killed. Not bullets, not greed. Noise." I remembered that. Still do. That's why it hurt to watch him come apart the way he did. Not all at once, never with him. It was always slow, like rust eating the inside of a pipe. From the outside, he still looked solid, but I saw it. I was there, in the room, in the back seat, in the hallways where nobody looked twice at me because they didn't think I mattered. But I watched, and what I saw, it wasn't a fall. It was a fade. It started with the meetings. Used to be, when Louis called a sit-down, everybody showed up on time. Didn't matter who you were, labor guy, street guy, banker, butcher. If Mr. Buchalter sent word, you didn't ask when, you asked how fast. But by late 37, people were late, not real late, 5 minutes, 10, but that was new. You could feel the difference in the room. He'd be sitting at the table already, hands folded, cigarette untouched, and they'd walk in talking to each other instead of greeting him first. One time I saw a guy named Benny pull out a chair for himself before Louis sat down. That chair didn't get used again, not by Benny, not by anyone. But even then, Louis didn't bark. He never barked. He just let the message send itself. Benny got transferred to Chicago 2 weeks later. Last I heard, he was sweeping floors in a cold warehouse. No title, no heat. Still, the pattern was there. Respect was slipping, slowly. And Mr. Buchalter? He didn't say it, but I knew he could feel it too. There was this one night. Stuck with me. We were holed up in a brownstone in Flushing. Not hiding, just lying low. Meetings had gotten messy. Dewey was on the prowl. Names were getting printed too often, and Louis hated being in the papers. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, peeling the label off a bottle of seltzer when he came in. No jacket, tie half undone. He poured a drink, neat, no ice, stood at the window, looking out at nothing. Then he said, without turning, "You ever wonder how it ends?" I didn't answer right away. Didn't know if it was rhetorical or if he really wanted to know. But I said something. I said, "Not for guys like you, sir." He laughed, soft, bitter. "You think there's a different end for me?" He finally looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired, not just from the day, not just from stress, but deep, in the bones, in the way his shoulders sagged and his hands didn't move like they used to. "They think I'm scared of death," he said. "I'm not. I'm scared of forgetting how I got here, of looking around and realizing I became what I used to step over." I didn't know what to say. He finished the drink, sat down across from me. "They're going to turn," he said. "Every one of them. Not because they want to, but because I gave them permission by building something they can live without." I'd never heard him talk like that, but I think by then, he knew the empire was already cracking. I started noticing the cracks more often after that. Money started coming in late. Factories that used to pay on the 1st now waited till the 10th. Some stopped paying altogether, hiding behind excuses. Auditors, new ownership, union complaints. Louis didn't send a crew. He didn't make examples, not right away. That's when I knew he wasn't just dealing with pressure, he was dealing with doubt. He wasn't sure how far he could push anymore. He used to have this gift, calculating risk without blinking. You crossed him, he'd give you just enough rope to hang yourself. But now he second-guessed. He'd call meetings to talk about one name, one shipment, one factory. He'd sit with his lawyers longer than he did with his enforcers. He started reading the papers more, every morning, front to back, not out of vanity, out of paranoia. He was trying to see which way the wind was blowing, and it was blowing against him. The worst was the night he got word about ruthless flipping. I was there. He was in his office on the 2nd floor of a bookbindery we used as a front. He was reading something, a small report, legal stuff. His face didn't move when he finished. He just placed the paper down, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes for a long time. Then he said, "Abe was a smart boy. Should have strangled him when he got clever." That was all. But I knew it cut deep, because Abe, Kid Twist Relez, wasn't just another trigger man. He was one of Louis's investments, trained, groomed, trusted. And now he was the knife cutting open the stomach of the whole operation. Things got worse fast. Meetings started getting canceled. Club owners stopped returning messages. Lawyers began using phrases like limited options and public pressure. And then came the night Louis disappeared. No warning. One minute he's at the club on 46th shaking hands. The next, gone. No calls, no notes, just vanished. The bosses panicked, not because they missed him, but because his name was now radioactive. Anyone tied to him too directly became a target. I got phone calls from men I hadn't heard from in years, asking if I knew where he was. I didn't. He left me behind too, and maybe he was right to. I wasn't a hitter. I wasn't part of the machine. I was just someone who had watched too long. Weeks passed, then months. Rumors spread. Some said he was in Cuba. Others said Kansas. I even heard someone say he was living as a rabbi in Chicago. Then, the big one dropped. He surrendered. Walked into Hoover's office like it was a hotel lobby and handed himself over. I didn't believe it at first. Not because I thought he couldn't do it, but because I didn't think he'd let them have the last word. But when the papers hit with that photo, Louis, hands folded, eyes blank, it felt real. The man I worked for, who could freeze a room with silence, who never needed to shout, who built fear like some men built bridges, was now a headline. And from that moment on, the world turned its back. Fast. I visited him once. Sing Sing, didn't tell anyone, didn't stay long. They brought him out to the visitors area. Clean shirt, tired face. Still carried himself straight, but he looked smaller. He sat down, looked at me, smiled. Just barely. "You're still in this life?" he asked. I nodded. "Get out," he said. Just like that. Simple. He leaned forward a little, lowered his voice. "This life don't retire you. It buries you." Then he leaned back, looked past me like I was already gone. The visit ended soon after. We didn't shake hands. We didn't say goodbye. I never saw him again. But I never forgot what he said. By the time they moved him to Sing Sing, Louis wasn't the man he used to be. He still wore his face like armor, calm, unreadable, but inside, something had caved in. Not broken, not shattered, just collapsed, like the inside of a house that still looks fine from the street. He didn't speak much, didn't ask for special treatment, didn't make demands. He just walked the slow hallway to cell 15 on Tier E, death row, and sat down on the metal bunk like he'd been waiting for it all along. He had 2 uniforms, 1 toothbrush, 1 dull razor. The warden gave him a nod and told him the rules. No fights, no smuggling. Lights out at 9. Chapel optional. Execution at the state's discretion. Louis nodded once. Understood. That was it. From that moment on, he was no longer Mr. Buchalter, the feared racketeer, the man who built Murder Inc. from a whisper. He was just prisoner 6921, a statistic waiting for a date. Death row wasn't like the rest of the prison. It had its own air, thicker, quieter. No shouting, no jokes, no card games, just the sounds of men waiting for their names to be called, for appeals to be denied. For the final walk down the hall with a strap around each limb and a priest at their side. Louis never talked to the others. He recognized a few faces, men he'd seen in club basements or whispered about in phone booths. Now they were bones in uniforms, walking in slow circles behind bars, muttering to themselves like they were already halfway gone. One guy named Rocco used to hum every night, same 3 notes, over and over, high, low, high, like a lullaby no one else knew. He was in for stabbing his landlord with a kitchen knife after a rent hike. Another one, Charlie Dent, used to preach through the bars, loud, slurred. Bible verses mixed with cursing. He said Jesus talked to him through the toilet pipes, swore he was going to rise again after they fried him. Louis didn't engage, didn't hum, didn't pray. He wrote. Every night, between 8 and 9, he pulled out a notebook they gave him and scribbled a few lines. Tiny print, clean, no scribbles, no ink stains. No one knew what he wrote. Not letters, not appeals. Just thoughts, numbers, memories, like he was trying to document a life no one would believe happened. His days followed a rhythm that never changed. 5:30 a.m. Wake up. Metal tray slid through the slot. Oatmeal, sometimes hard bread. Black coffee that smelled like rust. 7:08 a.m. Cell check. Guards patrolling. Counting heads. Louis always nodded politely. Never caused trouble. 10:08 a.m. Yard time. 30 minutes in a caged pen the size of a restaurant bathroom. He didn't pace. He just stood with his hands behind his back, staring at the wall like it might blink. Noon, lunch, beans, rice, bony meat. Afternoon, silence. Some guys slept, some screamed. Louis just sat, thinking. Evening. The lights dimmed, but they never went out. Death row stayed lit, always. Just dim enough to forget what time it was. Just bright enough to remind you weren't dead yet. And at night, when the world outside went quiet, Louis would lay flat on his cot, eyes to the ceiling, like he used to in hotel rooms, waiting for sleep that never came. He got a visit once a week. His lawyer mostly. Sometimes his wife. But those grew fewer, less frequent, less warm. The last time she came, she didn't touch the glass, didn't even lift her hand. She just sat there, lips tight, eyes red. "They're saying you gave the orders," she said. Louis didn't respond. "Did you?" Still, nothing. She looked at him like she was trying to remember the man she married, the man who once sent flowers to her apartment every Tuesday, the man who never yelled, who read books and combed his hair just right. But now he looked like a ghost of that man. "I don't know what's true anymore," she whispered, and then she left. She never came back. He didn't blame her. He never said goodbye either. Some nights the guards whispered. They didn't know he could hear them. They talked about the other executions, about the chair, about how a man's body jolts when the current hits, how the first second is silent, but the second one smells like burnt hair and metal. One of them said he hoped Louis would cry, said he wanted to see the big shot beg for his life. Another said he'd bet $5 Louis wouldn't even flinch. Louis heard all of it, never reacted. But those words sank in, not in fear, but in finality. Because no matter how clean he lived, no matter how far he kept himself from the blood, he was going out like the men he used to send letters about, the ones who got orders, who followed rules, who kept quiet. Now he was just another sentence on another paper, waiting to be carried out. One morning, they brought in a new guy, young, no more than 23, thin, nervous, tattoos on his fingers. Louis could tell right away. The kid wasn't built for this. He screamed the first night, cried, beat on the walls. The guards ignored him. Louis didn't. After dinner, he slipped a note through the bars, a short one, just 2 lines. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. Breathe." The kid didn't respond. But he stopped screaming after that. A week later, he hung himself with a strip of his bedsheet. Didn't leave a note. Louis folded the paper back up and placed it inside his notebook. Didn't speak a word about it. The days got longer, then shorter. Time stopped making sense. They said the final appeal was filed, then denied, then filed again, then denied again. His lawyers stopped saying, "when." They started saying, "soon." And that's when Louis started writing names. Not full pages, just names. First name, last name, men he'd worked with, men he'd outlived. Some were dead, some in hiding, some probably living normal lives with families and dogs and safe mortgages in quiet towns. But to Louis, they were all ghosts now. He wrote them down like a list of debts, one after another. When he ran out of room, he turned the notebook sideways and wrote in the margins. Not to forgive, not to confess, just to remember. The priest came 3 times. Louis never refused him, but he never engaged either. He just listened to prayers, to soft words about mercy and redemption. One day the priest asked him, "Do you believe in hell?" Louis thought for a while. "I believe in silence," he said. "If there's anything worse than that, then maybe." The priest didn't ask again. Finally, the guard came. Midnight, soft knock on the bars, no announcement, no ceremony, just, "It's time." Louis stood, He didn't tremble, didn't shake. He combed his hair in the mirror one last time, smoothed his shirt, put on the jacket they gave him, plain brown, thin fabric, didn't fit quite right. He walked slow, no cuffs, just a priest behind him, mumbling prayers to a god Louis hadn't spoken to in years. They brought him to the door. The chair waited, thick leather, wires hanging, straps laid out like a butcher's table. He sat, didn't flinch. They strapped him in, chest, arms, legs, asked him for last words. He paused, looked past the glass, past the priest, past the guards. "I ran a business," he said. "Some days it ran me, that's all." And then he nodded once. The switch was pulled, the lights flickered, and the man who never screamed, who never begged, who built his empire on silence, died the same way, quiet, alone. Long before the switch was pulled, Louis Buchalter was already sentenced, not by the jury, not even by the judge, but by the narrative, by the story that powerful men wrote around him, one they needed, one they fed to the public like a confession dressed up in a press release. To them, Louis wasn't just a criminal. He was a tool, a symbol, a means to an end. They didn't kill him because they had to. They killed him because it was convenient, because the system needed a trophy. It started with Thomas Dewey, young, clean-cut, sharp as a blade, the kind of man mothers pointed to in the paper and said, "Why can't you be more like him?" Dewey didn't speak like the other politicians. He didn't scream about morality or God. He talked numbers, organized crime statistics, cases built on paper, not passion. But make no mistake, he was playing the game just as hard, and he needed a win, a public one. By the late 1930s, New York was cracking at the seams. Corruption, murders, union violence. People were tired of hearing about cops on the take, about DAs who looked the other way, about gangsters living like kings while normal families couldn't even afford butter. So Dewey made a list, not of who was guilty, but of who the public wanted to see fall. And right at the top of that list, above thugs, above petty killers, even above Luciano, was a name that came wrapped in contradiction. Louis Lepka Buchalter, the businessman gangster, the man who wore suits better than most senators, the man who used pens instead of pistols. To the public, he was terrifying, not because he looked dangerous, but because he looked respectable. That made him worse. In private meetings, Dewey made it clear. Buchalter isn't just a mob boss. He's the face of a system that thinks it can outsmart the law. That ends with him. Those words echoed down through courtrooms, offices, back rooms of state buildings. And suddenly, people who'd never even heard of the garment district were reading about it in front-page headlines. Mob ties to labor unions exposed. Racketeering kingpin faces trial. Is this the end of Murder, Inc.? And it wasn't just the press, it was politics. Behind closed doors, men in suits negotiated Louis's fate like they were moving pieces on a chessboard. The governor wanted re-election. The federal prosecutor wanted a federal judgeship. The judges wanted their names remembered. And the easiest way to grease those wheels: give the people what they wanted, a clean execution. What they didn't talk about was the evidence. Not in detail. Because if you looked closely, things got murky. The murder Louis was convicted of, Joseph Rosen, had no witnesses, no physical proof. Just the testimony of Abe Reyes, a contract killer who turned informant to save his own skin. Reyes claimed Louis gave the order, said it casually, no hesitation. But his story changed. Names flipped, timelines shifted. Sometimes he said the hit was about money. Other times it was about Rosen talking too much. Later he said it was just business. Yet none of it directly connected Louis. No paper trail, no weapon, no scene. Just one man's word, taken from behind bars, used to fry another. But the prosecutors didn't care. They knew the trial wasn't about Rosen anymore. It was about making the public feel safe. It was about the story. Even the press, those supposed gatekeepers of truth, leaned into it. Because Louis's story sold papers. They printed sketches of him looking like a villain from a radio drama. Angular cheekbones, dead eyes, cigarette always in hand. They called him the gentleman executioner. a name he never used. They invented quotes, faked sources, claimed he'd confessed when he hadn't even spoken. They wrote about his rise, sure, but they salivated over his fall. The trial became theater. The sentencing was the grand finale, and the execution, that was just the final scene, wrapped in moral applause. But behind the curtains, not everyone clapped. Privately, even some within the system whispered doubts. One assistant prosecutor wrote in a letter to his wife, "If Lepke dies, we win the papers. But I wonder, does the law lose a piece of itself in the process?" Another clerk refused to watch the execution. He later told a friend, "It felt like we'd traded justice for PR." But no one said anything publicly, because that's not how the system works. You fall in line, you smile, you deliver the headline. And Louis had become the most valuable headline of the decade. Then there was the matter of Rel's death. Abe Rels, the star witness, the man who brought down half the syndicate with his testimony. In 1941, just a few months after delivering final statements in Louis's case, he fell from a 6th-story window at the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island. He was in protective custody, surrounded by police. The official story? He tried to escape, but the window he fell from had a locked screen, no furniture near it, no signs of a struggle. One of the guards was caught drinking on duty. Another was never interviewed. No one was charged. No one investigated deeply, just another quiet burial. But in the back rooms of the justice system, the whispers were loud. If Reyes was lying, who else goes free? If he was telling the truth, why is he dead? For Louis, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. The story was written. And no one rewrites stories once they're printed in ink. A week before the execution, a small group of state officials met in Albany. No press, no minutes taken. Just a quiet conversation about timing, optics, and closure. One man asked, "Do we gain more by keeping him alive?" Another replied, "We lose momentum if we delay." The people want blood. No one mentioned doubt. No one brought up Rels. No one asked if Louis deserved to die. They asked what it would mean if he didn't. That was all. And when the vote was done, quiet nods around the table. The date was set. March 4th, 1944. A Saturday. They chose it on purpose. Less paper the next day. More time for Monday headlines. Perfect spin. When the switch was pulled and Louis's body went still, the headlines were ready before the smoke cleared. Murder Inc. not boss dead. Electric justice served. The gentleman killer pays the price. New York cleans house. Lepke executed. Thomas Dewey gave a short statement. Justice was served. The rule of law stands. He didn't mention the appeal. Didn't mention the thin evidence. Didn't mention how Louis sat quietly until the end, like a man watching the end of someone else's story. Dewey got his judgeship. The governor got his re-election. The papers sold out by noon. And Louis? Louis got 3 paragraphs in a back column obituary. No funeral, no flowers, just a number burned into a death record. But the silence didn't stay silent forever. Years later, when the smoke cleared and memories faded, historians started digging. They found the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the politics. Some even argued Louis had been set up, not innocent, but sacrificed. Too dangerous to keep, too famous to let fade. He was worth more as a corpse, a symbol of victory in a city desperate for someone to blame. And so, the man who built Murder, Inc., who ran unions like banks, who kept his hands clean while others bled, didn't just die in the chair. He died in the papers, in the meetings, in the whispers, in the politics. And that's the real story, not the one they printed. The one they never wanted anyone to write. They thought the story ended when the switch flipped. They thought that once Louis Lepke Buchalter took his last breath in Sing Sing, the city would exhale, that the blood would stop pooling under tenement stoops, that men would go straight, that unions would untangle themselves from the noose of fear. But what they didn't understand was this. You can kill the man, but you can't kill the myth. And Louis? He left behind a ghost that didn't need flesh to keep moving. In the first weeks after his execution, things got quiet. Too quiet. There were no retaliation hits, no public funerals, no club meetings held in his honor. It was like the underworld had made a silent agreement. Don't say his name out loud. Not because they didn't care, because they were watching. And watching meant waiting. See, the thing about Louis wasn't just what he built, it was how he built it. He created a system, not just a syndicate. He built it the way Wall Street builds, with insulation, with chains of command, with deniability baked into every order. Even after his death, pieces of that system still moved. Money still changed hands. Envelopes still slid under doors. Men still kept their mouths shut when certain names came up. Only now. It was done in the dark, like a church that lost its priest but kept the sermons going. In Brooklyn, the kids still knew his name. Not the full one, not the history. Just Lepka. To them, he was a ghost story, the kind that came with warnings. Don't cross that alley at night. That's where Lepke's men used to drop bodies. Don't touch that locker in the old garment district warehouse. That's where Lepke's books were. Truth didn't matter. It was the legend that lingered. Graffiti started popping up on brick walls, crude tags with crown symbols or dollar signs drawn over a shadowy figure in a fedora. Some of it was art. Some of it was tribute. All of it said the same thing. He's gone, but the streets remember. One kid, maybe 17, used to run numbers for a small-time bookie down on 2nd Avenue. Skinny, smart mouth, quick feet. He carried his receipts in a stitched leather pouch tied to his belt. When asked why, he said, if Lepke was still alive, he'd respect a guy who runs clean. He didn't know who Louis really was, not the man, not the weight. But he knew the aura, the shape of power, and that was enough. The older guys, the ones who'd been around when Louis walked the earth in real time, didn't talk. They remembered too much. They remembered how the city smelled in the summers of the 30s. Hot garbage, ink, sweat, and fear. They remembered the sound of phone booths slamming after someone heard the wrong name. They remembered walking into a club and watching men fall silent just because Louis walked in behind them. Now those same men sat in back rooms of diners watching the next generation mispronounce his name. Lepke, Lepke, Lepke. They didn't correct them. What was the point? The name didn't belong to the man anymore. It belonged to the myth. Meanwhile, the remnants of Louis's empire didn't vanish. They morphed. The garment rackets splintered. A few were taken over by smaller crews. Others were absorbed into Italian-controlled unions or slowly swallowed by legitimate fronts with dirty hands. The trucking routes he once taxed now answered to different bosses, men with new names, new suits, new connections. But deep in their records, somewhere in the middle of forged contracts and fake invoices, the ghost of Lepke's structure still breathed. Some of his old lieutenants changed identities, moved out west, bought into real estate, left behind the streets but carried his blueprint. There was even a rumor, never confirmed, that a Las Vegas casino once operated on Lepke's silent principles for 2 whole decades. No direct hits, no drug deals on property, and no disrespect. If someone crossed the line, they disappeared, clean, quiet, cold, just like the old days. But not everything that lingered was proud. Some things rotted, some men never adjusted. One of Louis's former bodyguards, name lost to time, ended up homeless, living under the Williamsburg Bridge with nothing but a flask and a wool coat 3 sizes too big. He used to talk to himself on cold mornings, shouting names no one else recognized. You don't talk to Dewey. You don't take the stand. Abe was a rat. Abe sang and look what it got him. 6 stories down, and nobody cared. They made him into a story, but he was just a man. Just a man. Cops would find him passed out by noon, sometimes with newspaper clippings stuffed in his coat. Old ones, yellowed, edges curled, all of them with Louis's face. In time, new kings took the throne. New York moved on. The city got noisier, louder. The quiet fear Louis had ruled with turned into chaos. Drugs flooded the streets. Drive-bys replaced contract hits. Honor codes dissolved into money-first madness. And yet, in courtrooms. His name still came up. In legal studies, he was cited as the only mob boss executed by the U.S. government. In closed-door FBI training sessions, they referenced his empire as a case study in criminal corporate structure. Even in movies, they borrowed his silence. The well-dressed gangster who didn't need to shout, who killed with paperwork, who sat behind the curtain and pulled strings with his fingertips. Louis became a template. Even in death, he taught them something. But what no one really talks about, not in law books, not in documentaries, is how lonely the power was. How the system he built ended up swallowing him whole. He was a man who understood order better than anyone, but in the end, the order turned on him, used him, then discarded him. That's the part the stories forget, that behind the myth, there was a man who couldn't sleep, a man who built his life on silence and died with no one left to speak for him. One night, years later, an old friend of his, not a gangster, just a tailor who used to hem Louis' shirts, told a story to a table of young men who were laughing too loud over beers. He leaned in, voice low. You know what Louis really hated? The boys shook their heads. He hated when people thought fear was power. They laughed. But the tailor didn't. He took a sip of tea and stared out the window. Power ain't being feared. Power's when nobody has to say your name, but they all act like you're still watching. Today, nobody remembers how Louis walked, how he tilted his head slightly when someone lied, how he fixed his cuffs before every meeting, how he never wore loud ties, how he used to hum under his breath while counting money, low, tuneless, like a man distracting himself from what he knew he had to do. No photos captured that, no courtroom transcript, no file in the FBI archive, just pieces, fragments, echoes of a man buried under a name too big to fit in a grave. If you walk the Lower East Side late at night, when the wind moves just right, and the clubs are closed and the street lamps flicker like dying candles, you can still feel it. A weight, not evil, not holy, just heavy, like something once powerful stood there, not to be worshipped, not to be feared, but to be understood, like the city itself remembers, not what Louis did, but what it cost him. Before the name Lepka meant anything, before the factories, before the suits, before the envelopes and the nods and the silence that followed him like a shadow. There was a boy named Louis, a skinny, sharp-eyed boy in a crumbling tenement on Suffolk Street, where the floorboards creaked even when nobody moved and the winters found their way through every crack in the wall. He was born in 1897, the son of Polish-Jewish immigrants who came to New York like everyone else, with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. His father, Meyer Buchalter, worked when there was work, mended when there wasn't. Shoemaker, cobbler, sometimes peddler. Whatever kept food in the house and the landlord from knocking too hard. His mother, Rose, was the kind of tired that no sleep could fix. Worry lived in her spine. It showed in her hands, cracked knuckles from too much scrubbing, too little rest. Louis was the fourth of seven, the middle, the forgotten one. Not old enough to lead, not young enough to protect. He learned early how to disappear, how to take up just enough space to survive without being noticed, how to listen when adults argued behind closed doors, how to pick his moments. He didn't cry much, even when he should have. Once, when he split his forehead on a loose nail near the kitchen stove, his mother pressed a rag to it and muttered in Yiddish about bad omens. He sat still the entire time, bleeding, silent. Later that night, he went to bed with a pounding headache and the smell of boiled onions in the air. He never mentioned the pain, not once. The apartment was a two-room box shared by 9 people. Kitchen table made of uneven wood. Stove that hissed in protest every time it was lit. One window, facing a brick wall so close you could reach out and touch it. In the summer, the heat stuck to your skin like syrup. In the winter, you could see your breath while lying under 3 layers of patchwork blankets. His mother tried to stretch meals, potatoes, cabbage, maybe fish on good weeks. Bread was a staple, always a little stale. Louis learned the weight of hunger not in his stomach, but in his bones, the kind that made your knees soft and your mind sharper. Hunger taught him focus, and shame came early. His shoes had holes in the soles. He stuffed newspaper inside to keep the wet out. Other boys noticed. One winter morning, a kid in his class pointed and laughed. "Hey, Louis, why you got paper in your shoes? You writing letters to your toes?" Laughter, louder than it should have been. Louis didn't react, just stared back to flat, unreadable, until the laughter died in the boy's throat. 2 weeks later, that same boy's coat went missing during recess. It was never found. School was complicated. Louis wasn't stupid. Far from it. He had a memory like a steel trap and eyes that saw everything. But school bored him. Not the learning, the structure, the submission. He hated lining up, hated raising his hand, hated pretending he respected men who couldn't pronounce his last name right. More than once, a teacher would pull him aside and say things like, "You've got potential, Louis, but you've got to stop staring like that. It unsettles people." By age 14, he was done. He walked out one day and never went back. Didn't announce it, didn't cry. Just folded his books, tucked them under his arm, and walked down Delancey Street like he was already someone else. He got a job sweeping the floor at a hat factory. Hard work, long hours, cash under the table. But he watched, always watched, how the foreman skimmed wages, how the delivery boys pocketed change, how the union guys showed up with cigars and walked out with cash. That's when he understood. The real money didn't come from working. It came from watching the workers. By the time he turned 16, Louis had a new kind of education. He started running small errands for local fixers, men who lived half in daylight and half in smoke. He'd deliver notes, messages, sometimes packages, never asked what was inside. One day, a man named Mo, the tongue, Greenbaum, told him, "You don't talk much, huh?" Louis just shrugged. Mo smiled. "Good. That's a rare thing. Keep it. Talking's what gets people killed." That was Louis's first lesson in power. Not violence, not strength, restraint. By 17, he was earning more than his father. By 18, he was lending money to boys older than him, charging interest, keeping books with neat little notes in the margins. By 19, he bought his first suit, black wool, tight cuffs, simple pinstripe. He looked in the mirror and saw something new, not just a man, but a vision, a blueprint. That same night, he sat at the dinner table in the family apartment, now even more cramped, and watched his father slice a loaf of bread like it was gold. Nobody said it out loud, but they all knew. Louis was different. His brothers joked louder around him. His sisters avoided his eyes. His mother, she just stared, not with pride, with fear, as if she could already see the fire growing inside him, the one that would either warm their whole family or burn everything to the ground. He tried going straight, once, briefly. Opened a dry goods store with a friend, legal papers, real inventory. He lasted 6 months. Then the taxes came, the inspectors, the bribes, the random fees for sanitation, the missing packages. The city didn't let people like Louis play fair. It punished them when they tried. So he closed shop, quietly, no debt. And by the end of that year, he had partnered with a man named Jacob Gura Shapiro, another sharp mind with a thirst for leverage. Together, they stepped into the world of labor racketeering, not as thugs, but as organizers, strategists. Louis learned the flow of goods like some men learn the tides. He knew how to delay a shipment without raising suspicion, how to turn a walkout into a payday, how to break a man without bruising him. The boy who used to stuff newspaper in his shoes was now taxing the factories that used to laugh at him. One night, in the back office of a garment shop, Louis looked over a set of ledgers, paused, and said, "We don't take what's theirs. We make them need us." It wasn't about theft. It was about necessity. Build a system so efficient, so quiet, so dependable, that they forget it's built on fear. That was Louis's genius, not in killing. In creating a world where violence wasn't needed, only the threat of it. But none of that started in the clubs. None of that was born in smoky meetings or backroom deals. It all started in that cold apartment on Suffolk Street. In the hunger, in the shame, in the silence, in the moment he watched his father kneel to a landlord who laughed at his accent. That's when Louis decided, I will never beg, not for rent, not for food, not for space in this world. And he never did, not even at the end. People like to pretend criminals are born bad. But Louis was born normal. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He just didn't want to be small anymore. And when the world wouldn't make room for him, he carved it himself. It happened just months before the cell door slammed behind Louis for the final time, back when his name still held enough weight to move a few favors, when he still had lawyers with nervous smiles and middlemen willing to run messages without asking why, when death was no longer a whisper, but not yet an appointment. He got word that Gura Shapiro, his old friend, his partner, his shadow, was dying. Not on the street, not in a blaze of revenge or betrayal like so many others, but quietly, in a private ward in a Bronx hospital. Liver failure, skin yellowing, breath shallow, body too thin to carry the weight of his past. The same man who once shook down entire unions with a single sentence now couldn't hold a spoon without spilling half of it. And Louis? He asked to see him. It wasn't easy. The hospital was being watched, not officially, but enough to make people nervous. Louis had already vanished from public view. The manhunt was on. Papers were printing rumors like gospel, and every cop in the city wanted to be the one to drag him in. So he didn't go through the front. He went through the back, under a false name, wearing an overcoat 2 sizes too large and a cap pulled low. No entourage, no driver, just him and a man named Meyer who owed him a debt from years back. They moved fast, through service elevators, past quiet nurses, into a room that smelled of bleach, steel, and something heavier, regret maybe. And there was Gura, sunken, pale, eyes too big for his face now. When he saw Louis, he smiled, half real, half ghost. Look who crawled out of the grave before me. Louis pulled up a chair, didn't smile back, just nodded. You look like hell. I feel like heaven's backed up. They both chuckled. And for a second, just a second, it was like they were back in that tiny basement office off Grand Street, eating deli sandwiches and counting factory dues by candlelight long before the headlines, the contracts, the blood. Silence came after that. Not awkward, just heavy. The kind of silence 2 men earn after bearing enough secrets together. Finally, Gura spoke. You hear about Dutch's kid? Louis shook his head. Dead. How? Shot in a card game. Queens. Louis said nothing. Whole world's moving fast without us, Gura said. We built the engine, they took the wheel. Louis looked at the floor, then at the window. The sun was setting over the Bronx, that tired orange haze that makes everything look softer than it really is. You ever think it'd end like this? He asked. Gura smiled bitterly. Yeah, I just thought I'd be the one watching you go, not the other way around. A pause. Then Gura asked, So what now? You keep running? Doesn't matter, they want a body, not the truth. You give them one. I'm here, aren't I? The conversation drifted after that. They talked about old times. The first time they shook down a union boss, a man with shaky hands and a gold watch who cried halfway through the meeting. The time they shared a bottle of gin during a city blackout and joked about buying City Hall one day. The summer Louis got sick, and Gura brought soup every night for a week, even when Louis threatened to kill him if he didn't stop hovering. You were the only one I ever trusted to do the books, Louis said quietly. That's 'cause I had no head for bullets, Gura grinned. Made me safe. Then silence again, this time deeper, because the real reason for the visit hadn't been said yet. Louis didn't come to trade memories, he came for something else. You remember Rosen? Louis asked suddenly. Gura's smile faded, slow, controlled. Yeah, I remember. Did I give the order? Gura's eyes met his, and for the first time the room felt cold. You telling me you forgot? I remember the talk, I remember the options, I don't remember the nod. Maybe you didn't nod, Gura said. Maybe you just didn't say no. Louis sat with that. It echoed. Maybe you just didn't say no. After a while, Gura leaned back, coughed, wiped his mouth. You want to know if it was worth it? Louis didn't answer. He didn't need to. Gura closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, tired but sharp. I think about that a lot. Late nights. When the machines are beeping and my guts are swimming in poison. A long pause. I got no kids, Lou. No wife. No name worth writing on a headstone. I spent my life making sure other men feared mine. But now, I'd trade every dollar we touched just to hear someone call me Papa one time. Louis looked away, out the window again. The Bronx kept moving. Cars, people, lights, life. We thought we were taking power, Gura said. But it wasn't power. It was rent. And now, the bill's due. That hit something deep. Because Louis, for all his cold, for all his control, had never asked himself what was left. He had played the long game. Built the cleanest racket in the dirtiest city, outlasted Luciano, out-schemed Dutch, outsmarted cops for a decade straight. But now, what was left? A name in a headline, a cold bed, a bullet in someone else's chamber, waiting for the state's permission. He stood up after a while, straightened his coat. "You'll be gone before me," he said. "You sure about that?" "Yeah, and I don't think I'll follow far behind." Gura tried to laugh, couldn't. He just coughed, then said, "Don't let them take your voice, Lou. They can take your name, your time, but don't let them write your ending for you." Louis nodded. "They already have." Gura smiled again, a real one this time, weak, fading. "Then take it back." They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, just a look. A long, tired, final look between men who'd shared everything except regret, until now. Louis left through the same back door he came in. No one saw him go, not even the sun. Gura died 2 weeks later. No funeral, no obituary, just a line in a sealed report. His body was burned, ashes scattered. No one came to claim what was left except silence and memory. Louis never spoke of the visit, not to anyone. But after that day, something changed. He moved slower, spoke less. Not out of fear, but as if he was finally carrying the full weight of the years. He stopped running shortly after. And the rest, you already know. People like to talk about power like it's clean, like it shines, like it's a goal. But real power? Real power is a debt. And if you live long enough, you meet the collector. For Louis, it came in a hospital room in the Bronx, from a dying man who once carried his secrets and whispered the one truth no one else ever had the guts to say. You didn't order it, Lou. You just didn't stop it. It came on a Thursday, cold, gray, and quiet. The kind of morning that made the Hudson look like it had given up trying to move. Louis sat on the edge of his cot, same as he did every day. Shirt buttoned to the top, hair combed back, elbows on knees, palms resting flat. He was reading the back of a torn cigarette carton, tracing the letters like they had something new to say. When the footsteps came, he didn't look up. 3 sets, boots, not shoes. Measured steps, not rushed, not casual, official. He already knew. The door opened with a slow click. Warden Elwyn Jennings stepped inside. Narrow face, dark-rimmed glasses, posture too proper to be kind. Behind him, 2 guards stood like shadows, arms folded tight. One held a yellow envelope. The warden cleared his throat as if the words had weight he had to lift first. "Mr. Buchalter." Louis looked up, calm. "Elwyn." It wasn't mockery, just the tone of a man who'd stopped pretending. "The date has been set. No ceremony, no pity." He stepped forward, opened the envelope, and read, "Louis Buchalter. Execution by electric chair is scheduled for Saturday, March 4th at 11 p.m. The room held its breath. Louis nodded once. "All right." Jennings didn't move. He seemed to be waiting for something. Protest, pleading, a reaction. But Louis simply placed the carton down, stood, and smoothed his pants. "Anything else?" The warden paused. "Do you wish to speak to the chaplain?" "I'll think about it. You may write your final statement, deliver it any time before the 4th. We'll accommodate any reasonable requests for food, visitation, or religious rites." Louis almost smiled. "Accommodate?" Jennings blinked. "That's the term. You boys love your terms." The warden's lips tightened. He handed Louis a small folder. blank sheets of paper, a pencil, a form titled Final Requests. Then he stepped back. We'll speak again. And just like that, the door shut. The footsteps faded, and Louis was alone. He sat back down, didn't touch the folder, didn't touch the paper. He just stared at the wall, a hairline crack near the corner. He'd stared at it 1,000 times, memorized its path like a road map. But now it felt different. It wasn't just a crack in concrete, it was proof. Proof that even stone gives out if you press it long enough. The other inmates knew. Word always travels fast on death row. They didn't ask, but they watched. That night when Louis stepped into the yard for his 30 minutes, the noise stopped. No humming from Rocco, no rants from Charlie Dent, no cage tapping. Just wind and wire and the faint whistle of a train on the far side of the river. Louis stood by the fence, hands behind his back, looking out like he wasn't trapped, like he was just waiting for someone who was late. He didn't sleep that night, but he hadn't really slept in years. He just lay still, eyes open, letting the ceiling tell him stories. He remembered the day he met Gura, the first time he tasted black coffee, the cold feel of a revolver when he first held it, the smell of hot ink on a payroll slip, the flicker of fear in a foreman's eyes after Louis leaned in and said, "This is your only chance." But he didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just remembered. Because that's what time does when it runs out. It doesn't race. It slows, forces you to replay every moment you thought you could outrun. The next morning, he filled out the final requests form. He declined religious counsel. He requested black coffee, rye toast, and a single hard-boiled egg for his last meal. He asked for a fresh white shirt and a black tie. He requested no visitors. And at the bottom of the page, where it said final words for public record, he wrote one sentence: "You never knew who I was." He folded the form once cleanly and handed it to the guard without looking up. That afternoon, a letter arrived. He recognized the handwriting, his lawyer. He opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside, a brief summary of the final appeal. Denied, unanimously. The language was cold, technical. All grounds of appeal have been reviewed and found without merit. Execution will proceed as scheduled under New York state law. Louis traced the words with his thumb, not in sadness, but like a man checking a list he already knew was complete. Later that day, a young guard, new, fresh-faced, jumpy hands, approached the cell. He looked at Louis like he was a haunted painting. "Mr. Buchalter?" Louis raised an eyebrow. "That's me. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say I read about you." Louis gave him a long look. "That so?" "Yeah. You built something. You ran the whole city." Louis didn't answer. The kid shifted nervously. "I mean, I know what they say, but do you think it was worth it?" Louis leaned forward, rested his forearms on his knees. "What's your name?" William." "You got a wife, William?" "No, sir." "Parents still alive?" "Yeah." "You go home at night?" "Yes." Louis nodded. "Then don't ask men like me if it was worth it. You wouldn't know what the answer meant." William flushed. He nodded once and walked away. Didn't speak to Louis again. The days ticked by like slow drips in a leaky pipe. Each morning was colder. Each meal tasted like cardboard. Each hour blurred into the next. On March 3rd, the warden visited again. "Is there anything you wish to revise?" "No." "Any final call to be made? Any statement to the press?" "They've written enough stories. Let them guess the ending." "You've been offered a rabbi." "He doesn't know me." Jennings sighed. "You've handled this with dignity." Louis gave him a faint smile. "You say that like it matters." That night, Louis shaved. Carefully, washed his face, brushed his teeth, combed his hair. He put on the white shirt and black tie, tied it 3 times before it sat right. When the guard came at 10:30 p.m., Louis was ready. They walked slowly down the corridor. No chains, no cuffs, just footsteps. Soft voices behind bars, prayers, curses, silence. Louis didn't look left or right. He kept his eyes forward, like a man walking into a meeting he'd prepared for his whole life. The final door opened. The chamber was small, smelled like metal, bleach, and burnt dust. The chair was waiting. Leather, wood, copper plates, straps hanging loose like hands waiting to hold. He sat, didn't tremble, didn't blink. A guard stepped forward, tightened the straps. Another adjusted the electrodes. The chaplain stood to the side, whispering verses Louis didn't hear. Jennings approached. "Any last words?" Louis looked past him, through the glass into nothing, then said, "If I'm remembered, let it be true." He closed his eyes. The mask came down, and the room went still. 11:01 p.m. The switch flipped. The current surged, and Louis Buchalter, once the most feared man in New York, the quiet king of blood and balance, died as he lived, with silence. In the report, it said, death was instantaneous. It wasn't. It never is. But the system had done its job. Paperwork was filed. Body cremated, name archived, headline printed, another chapter closed, another man erased. But if you walked the cell block after he was gone, you could still feel him, in the way the guards whispered a little softer, in the way the other prisoners sat straighter, in the quiet that took 3 whole days to break. Because no matter what the state said, you don't kill a man like Louis Buchalter. Not entirely. You just file him away and pray he stays quiet. His name was Sam Delaney, 25, clean-pressed, clipboard in one hand, nervous smile in the other. He'd started at the New York Herald-Chronicle just 8 months earlier, mostly writing filler pieces, council meetings, street festivals, obituaries when no one else wanted to do them. Then, one Tuesday morning, the editor, a loud man with coffee breath and the attention span of a drunk fly, called him into the glass office. "You're going to Sing Sing," he said. Sam blinked. "Excuse me?" "Buchalter's getting the chair this weekend. You're covering it." Sam swallowed. He'd heard the name, of course, everyone had. Louis Lepka, Buchalter, mobster, union boss, Murder Inc., the only crime boss the U.S. government ever scheduled for execution. "You want me to, interview him?" "Jesus, no, just observe. File the piece, paint the scene, smoke in the air, guards stiff as boards, warden looking like he swallowed a Bible. You know the drill." "I've never done this before." "Neither has he. That's why it matters." And that was that. He was handed a press badge, a train ticket, and a list of phrases not to use in the article. No martyr, no wrongfully convicted, no complicated legacy. "The man ran a murder-for-hire operation," the editor snapped. "He gets a short column, a cold send-off, and we move on." Sam nodded, but the way his gut turned said something else. March 4th, 1944. 8 p.m. Sing Sing prison loomed like a concrete coffin above the Hudson River. The press room was nothing more than a converted storage space near the west wing. Low ceiling, 2 flickering bulbs, 10 chairs. Sam sat near the back, notebook open, pen ready. A few seasoned reporters chatted quietly, sipping from thermoses, trading old execution stories like war tales. "I was here for that Chicago kid last spring, the one who cried." "What about Rossetti? Pissed himself, twice. You ever see one smile before the switch? Now that sticks with you." Sam kept quiet. He didn't know what he expected, but it wasn't this. He thought maybe there'd be a sense of gravity, something solemn. Instead, it felt like a football game no one was excited to be at, but no one could leave. At 10:40 p.m., a guard stepped in. 10 minutes. The room fell quiet. Even the old pros leaned back in their chairs. Sam tapped his pen against the paper. Once, twice, stopped. He felt something building, not fear, not pity, something harder to name. He looked around and realized nobody here wanted to understand Louis Buchalter. They just wanted to record him. At 10:55 p.m., they were led down the corridor. A long hallway, muted lighting, thick walls. Every sound swallowed before it could echo. They passed the final cell block. Sam glanced sideways and caught a glimpse of a man staring from behind bars, eyes hollow, mouth moving without sound. Was he praying, cursing, saying goodbye? He didn't know. At the end of the hallway, the execution chamber waited. It was smaller than he imagined, cleaner. Chair in the center, copper wires, straps draped like sleeping snakes, a small viewing window in the wall. The air smelled like bleach, rubber, and tension. No poetry, no music, just the end. At 11 p.m. sharp, the door opened. 2 guards walked in, firm but not forceful. Between them walked Louis Buchalter. Sam had seen photos, but they didn't prepare him for how still the man was. He didn't look like a gangster. He looked like a clerk, a tired businessman at the end of a long meeting. Clean-shaven, black tie, white shirt, hands relaxed at his sides, no shaking, no stumbling. Sam's pen froze above the page, because what struck him wasn't Louis's presence. It was what wasn't there. No fear, no hate, no regret, just acceptance. Like the man had already left, and this was just the body finishing its role. They strapped him in, chest, arms, legs, checked the nodes, adjusted the cap. The warden approached. "Do you have any last words?" Louis looked past the glass, not at Sam, not at anyone, just into the quiet. Then he said, "If I'm remembered, let it be true." And that was it. No tears, no apologies, no curses, just the truth, whatever that meant to him. At 11:01 p.m., the signal was given, the lever pulled, and the room went electric. Sam didn't look away. He thought the moment would be too much, but instead he watched the body jolt once, then again, then settle. Watched the smoke rise from under the collar, watched the doctor step in, watched the nod, watched the guards unstrap him. Watched them carry the body out like it weighed nothing. The walk back to the press room was silent. Even the old reporters looked pale. One whispered, "He didn't scream." Another muttered, "Didn't even blink." Sam wrote the quote down, but it didn't feel like enough. Back in the city 2 days later, his article ran on page 6. "Murder Inc. boss executed at Sing Sing. Buchalter dies without resistance." The editor added the headline himself. The copy had been trimmed, his description softened, his analysis cut, his final paragraph removed entirely. Sam sat in the corner of the office rereading the paper. And all he could think was, "You never knew who I was." The same sentence Louis had said to the world just before the end. That night, Sam went home and opened his notebook. The one he didn't hand in, the one with the full notes, the real observations. And he wrote a new entry, a private one, not for print, not for a paycheck, just for truth. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't act like a boss. He died like a man who had made peace with the fact that peace was never part of the deal. They killed him to close a chapter. But I don't think the story ends here. I think he left questions we don't want to ask. He closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf, and promised himself that one day he'd write the real version, even if no one read it, even if it didn't sell, because something inside him had changed that night, not from the electricity, not from the silence, but from the way a man, who'd once been called the devil, left the world with more grace than the men who judged him. Years later, long after Sam left the paper, long after headlines stopped mentioning gangsters and the world turned its attention to new enemies, he pulled out the notebook again. The paper was yellowing, but the words still burned. He read them slowly, and for the first time, he understood what had been bothering him all these years. It wasn't that Louis died, it's that no one cared whether the truth died with him. March 4th, 1944, 6:03 p.m. I'm not tired. I thought I'd be, but I'm not. My body feels light, like it's already figured it doesn't belong to me anymore. The guards keep checking the hallway, pretending not to look at me. They think I don't see it. I do. I see everything. Always have. Even now. Especially now. Funny thing is, I don't feel regret. That's not bravado. That's not pride. It's just the truth. I've made peace with the way I moved through this world. I didn't kill for sport. I didn't hurt people because it made me feel powerful. I was a businessman, a builder, I created something in the cracks where this city didn't care who lived or died. And if I profited off it, so did plenty of others. They forget that part. They forget the homes paid for, the shoes put on kids' feet, the heat in the winter. They just remember the blood. But if we're telling the truth now, and we are, because who else is left to lie to, then I'll admit it. I let it go too far. That machine I built, the one that ran like clockwork, the one that kept the streets orderly while the cops got drunk in their patrol cars, I let it turn into something else, something hungry. It stopped being about control, started being about staying ahead of the fear. Because once you create fear, once it starts working for you, it doesn't stay in one place, it spreads. And soon, you're not running a business, you're running from ghosts. I haven't slept right in years. People always thought I was this calm, collected figure, cold as ice. But that calm came from exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones and never leaves. I'd lie awake at night, listening. Not for footsteps, not for sirens, but for the sound of someone saying my name in the wrong tone, in the wrong room, to the wrong person. You spend your life building silence, and eventually, silence starts building you. I remember the first time someone called me Lepke. It was a throwaway, a nickname, some kid on Rivington Street trying to be funny. Little Lepka, he said. I didn't laugh, neither did he the second time. But the name stuck, and like everything else, I wore it like a suit. If people needed a name to fear, I gave them one. They needed a story, I played the role. What they never understood, what they still don't understand, is that I wasn't the story. I was the quiet between chapters, the comma, not the exclamation mark. People think killers talk too much. They don't. It's the ones around them who do the talking. Killers? They learn early that words can't be unsaid, that orders whispered become screams when repeated in courtrooms. So I chose silence, and they mistook that for mystery, or power, or control. It was none of those. It was self-preservation. If you don't say it, they can't pin it. But eventually, someone else speaks for you. And now? Now they're writing the ending without asking me what I meant in the beginning. Gura used to say I was born for this life. But he was wrong. I was born for nothing, just like everyone else on Suffolk Street. I made this life because the other choice was to get eaten. You grow up watching your father get stepped over for pennies. You make a decision. You either keep shrinking or you learn to bite. I bit early, and I never let go. They say I killed Rosen. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. I gave a look, a silence, a pause. That's all it ever took. I didn't need to pull the trigger. I didn't need to dig the grave. I just needed to not stop it. That's the part no one talks about. In this business, inaction is a sentence, and I wrote more of those than I'll ever admit. The weird thing about death row, it's not the waiting, it's the clarity. Time stretches so thin that you start seeing through it, through yourself, through every fake smile, every handshake, every lie you told yourself to keep going. I thought I'd feel dread. I don't. I feel empty, not hollow, just done. Like a room that's been cleaned out, and you're the last piece of furniture left. I thought I'd miss the money. I don't. I thought I'd miss the power. I don't. I thought I'd miss the sound of a room going quiet when I walked in. I do. That silence, that was the only real proof that I existed. Now the silence is back, but this time, it isn't for me. It's around me. And I know it'll stay after I'm gone. Just not in the way I hoped. I wonder who will remember me. Not the papers, not the guards. I mean, the kid running numbers on the corner. Will he know the name? Will he spell it right? Will he understand what I built and what it cost? Probably not. They'll take what I made and strip my name off it. That's how it works. We build, they inherit, and they bury the blueprint. And I'm not bitter. I'm just awake. More awake than I've ever been. No smoke, no noise, no more pretending. This is the truest I've ever been. And the truest thing I can say is this. I was never trying to win. I was just trying not to lose. So what now? They'll walk me down the hall in a few hours. Ask if I want a priest. I'll say no. Ask if I have last words. I'll say maybe. And then they'll flip the switch, and I'll disappear. Just like that. And the city will keep moving. The buildings will keep standing. The names will keep changing. But for 1 second, just one, someone might wonder what it meant. Not the death, the life. If I had one wish, I'd wish someone would ask the real question, not did he kill, but what made him believe he had to? Because that's the question no one wants to answer. That's the truth they're scared of. Anyway, that's enough. The hallway's quiet. The guards are shifting. They'll be here soon. I'll stand when they open the door. I'll walk straight. And when they ask if I have last words, I'll say the same thing I've said to every man who thought they knew who I was. You never understood what you were looking at. And maybe that's for the best, because if they ever did, they'd have to admit they built me. And that's the part they can't live with. They didn't put Louis Buchalter on trial to fix the system. They did it to protect it. Because the truth is, Louis was never the root of the rot. He was the fruit. The polished, poisonous product of a city that taught boys to survive by turning suffering into leverage. And the machine, the one with marble floors and polished badges and courtrooms that reeked of cigars and sweat, fed off men like him. Until it didn't need them anymore. And then, it buried them. Quietly, publicly, efficiently. Let's start with the judges, men in robes, white hair. Latin carved above their heads in courthouse walls. Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Nice phrase. But justice? That wasn't in the courtroom when Louis sat on trial. What was in the room was strategy. The judge presiding over the Rosen case. He had once served on a state banking committee tied to unions Louis's men had been extorting for years. Conflict of interest? No one said a word. Why? Because the conviction was already decided. Louis wasn't being tried for murder, he was being tried for making the system look weak. See, for years Louis did the unthinkable. He brought order to crime. No messy shootings, no bodies in the park, no gang wars in the streets. He made crime profitable and efficient in a way that made the politicians nervous. He was too clean, too professional. He made it clear that corruption didn't need to be chaotic. And once people realized that, they stopped fearing chaos and started seeing through the mask of order. That scared the system more than bullets ever could. Now let's talk about the politicians. Men with clean hands and dirty boots. They smiled on camera, gave speeches about law and order, but behind closed doors, they owed Louis favors. He'd funded campaigns, paid for rallies, even got certain candidates in office by shutting down rival union voices just long enough to let the right man win. And they loved him for it, until the newspapers started asking questions, until Dewey started naming names, until Louis became a headline too loud to ignore. That's when they flipped. Not because they believed he was guilty, but because his guilt was useful. Look into the governor's office at the time. You'll find documents with names scratched out, meetings that never got logged, contributions that disappeared off the books. Why? Because Louis's trial gave them something they rarely hated, a villain the public already feared. They didn't have to convince anyone, didn't have to explain. Just say the name Lepke, and the mob was already assembled, so they let him burn. And in doing so, they bought themselves another decade of trust, another election cycle, another set of handshakes. Louis's death was their currency. And the cops? Don't even start. Everyone knew which precincts were on the take. The NYPD in the 30s wasn't about crime prevention, it was about crime management. As long as things didn't spill into the wrong neighborhoods, as long as certain lines weren't crossed, the system hummed along. Louis paid for that silence, monthly, envelopes, favor for favor. And the cops? They cashed those envelopes with two hands and thanked him with a wink. But when Dewey started digging, they turned on him like he was a stranger. They raided his safe houses, leaked false tips, pulled favors they never planned to repay, because they had to look clean now. And cleaning always starts by cutting off the dirtiest finger, even if the hand itself is filthy. But here's the part that cuts deepest. They built him, all of them. Louis didn't rise because he beat the system. He rose because he understood it better than they did. He studied its flaws, saw the cracks, realized how to turn its own corruption into a business model. And the system? It used him for that. Let him do the dirty work. Let him organize the chaos. Let him clean up the streets in a way no badge ever could. Then, when the tide turned, they stepped back and said, "He's the problem." And the public bought it. Because the public always wants a villain with a face. Behind closed doors, after the trial, deals were struck. Land, once owned by companies under Louis's control, was suddenly transferred to firms with political donors at the helm. Union leadership, once filled with men who reported to Louis, was replaced not by clean hands, but by quieter hands. Easier to manipulate, easier to steer. The structure stayed, only the names changed. The machine that Louis built, it kept humming. It just started sending the checks to different addresses. Years later, one of the assistant prosecutors, retired and drunk at a charity gala, whispered to a friend, "We didn't kill him for justice. We killed him so we could keep doing what he taught us without having to pay him for it." It never made the papers. Nothing ever does once you learn where the ink comes from. Even the press had its part to play. Louis had his reporters, guys he paid well, men who buried stories, spun narratives, changed headlines. They were the same ones who called him a menace the second the wind changed. The same ones who painted him with words they never used when he was alive. Monster, tyrant, executioner. He became larger than life after death, because that's when he was most useful. Dead men don't talk. And newspapers, they only care about two things, fear and closure. Louis gave them both. But the saddest part? The public wanted it that way. People don't want to hear the truth about systems. They don't want to hear that the judge who sentenced a man to death once shook his hand at a fundraiser. They don't want to hear that the cop who busted down the door once took cash to look the other way. They don't want to know that the city they live in, the city they pay taxes to, was stabilized not by law, but by organized crime that got too organized. So they cling to the simpler story. Lepke was evil. We got him. Now everything's better. And with that lie, they sleep easier. Even as the same games get played behind newer doors, by men with cleaner smiles. Louis Buchalter was the scapegoat of a generation, a man who wasn't destroyed because of what he did, but because of what he proved. That corruption is never just in the streets. It starts at the top. It just wears better suits. If you dig through the city archives today, you won't find a clean line connecting Louis to the politicians he funded. You won't find paperwork on how his operations got handed off after his execution. You won't find the letters the judges wrote to each other behind closed doors. But they existed. And the men who held them? They went home clean, died in warm beds, surrounded by families, tombstones etched with words like public servant, loving father, devoted patriot. While Louis, he was cremated. No grave, no marker, just a line in a death ledger and a name used as a cautionary tale. But the truth is still there, in the bones of the city, in the silence of records that never got typed, in the eyes of old men who still won't say his name unless the room is empty. Because they know. They all know. Louis Buchalter wasn't the disease. He was the symptom. And when symptoms speak too loud, the system cuts them out, not to heal, but to survive. Brooklyn, 1957. The city looked the same, but it wasn't. The corners were still cracked. The buildings still leaned in close like old men telling secrets. But the rhythm had changed. Old guards gone, new blood rising. It wasn't just about guns anymore. It was about product, heroin, pills, paper trails, and kids. Kids who didn't know what they were playing with. In a basement off Flatbush Avenue, 4 of them sat in a circle. Bare bulbs overhead, one swaying fan, cards on the table, cheap whiskey in plastic cups. One of them, a skinny guy with scars on his knuckles and a gold chain too heavy for his neck, leaned back and said, "You ever hear of Lepka?" The others paused, laughed. That old guy from the chair? Mob boss, right? Didn't he get smoked by the feds or something? Skinny shrugged. Yeah, but you know what I heard. He was the one who started all this, before the Colombians. Before the Sicilians ran unions. He had the whole damn city under his foot. The youngest of the group, a kid named Benny, maybe 17, leaned forward, eyes wide. Whole city, Skinny nodded. Whole thing. Cops, judges, politicians. They said he had the power to shut down a factory with a phone call. Nobody moved without him knowing. Then how'd he get caught? He didn't. They just couldn't afford to let him live. Benny sat back, chewing on that like it was a new religion. Think we could do that? The room went quiet. Nobody laughed this time. That was the thing about legends. They don't teach. They tempt. And Louis Buchalter? He wasn't a cautionary tale anymore. He was a blueprint. Except nobody reading it knew what the ink cost. Over the next few months, that little crew grew louder. They started running numbers, pushing small bags, shaking down bodegas with baseball bats and fake smiles. They called themselves The Table, because they said every real man eats at one, and whenever they scored big, Skinny would raise his glass and say, "To Lepke, the first boss," and the rest would repeat it, like it meant something, like they were part of a story they barely understood. But they weren't the only ones. Across the East River, in the Bronx, another crew was doing the same. They didn't even know his real name, just that Lepka was some kind of legend who killed quietly and never got caught until they needed a poster boy. In Queens, an older man who once ran errands for Meyer Lansky warned a new kid. You boys keep saying Lepke like he was a god, but gods don't die in electric chairs. The kid laughed. Nah, he didn't die. He just passed the torch. That's what they believed, because believing in ghosts is easier than facing the truth. The truth. Louis never passed anything, because there was no one to pass it to. He built his empire from silence and structure, discipline, order. He didn't run a crew. He ran a machine. And machines don't hand off blueprints to kids playing gangsta in basements. They break, and when they break, they get buried. But these new kids, they didn't know the rules. They didn't care. They had names to chase, and Lepke's name was just close enough to glory to get them killed. One of them did try to learn. Benny, the quiet one from Flatbush, started digging. He went to the library, found old microfilm, newspaper clippings, court transcripts, and slowly he started seeing the man beneath the myth. He saw the trials, the betrayal, the silence, the deals that weren't honored. He saw that Louis didn't die with pride. He died because he outlived his use. One night, Benny brought it up. They were drinking cheap gin, counting bills. You know, Lepke didn't go out a hero, right? Skinny scoffed. He took the chair like a man. He took the chair alone. The room went quiet. Benny kept going. His friends, gone. His network, taken. The system used him and dumped him. We keep saying his name like it means something, but none of us are building what he built. We're just playing house with ghosts. Nobody answered. They didn't like it. Truth hits harder than any bat ever could. Weeks later, Benny was gone. Rumors said he got picked up by a higher crew. Others said he just walked away. But Skinny never said his name again. And the table, it fell apart, 2 dead, 1 inside, 1 limping through Jersey trying to flip quarters into rent. No empire, no legacy, just echoes. And the name Lepka, it faded again. Until one day, 20 years later, a reporter interviewed an old man in a nursing home, a former bookkeeper from the garment union. When asked about the mob's influence, the man smiled. You boys keep talking about Gotti and Gambino like they wrote the book. He leaned in, voice a whisper. Lepke didn't write the book. He burned it, then built his own from ash. The reporter asked if he respected him. The old man shook his head. Respect? No. Feared him, yeah. Understood him? Never. That's why he's still dangerous. Because some names don't die. Not in paper, not in memory. They hang in the air like unfinished prayers, half warning, half invitation. And Louis Lepke Buchalter? His story became a mirror, a legend for those hungry for power, a ghost for those smart enough to know what that hunger costs. But here's the thing about ghosts. They don't protect you. They don't guide you. They just watch. And if you're not careful, they become your story too. Lower East Side, New York City, 1974. The streets had changed. The corner stores were Dominican now. The old butcher shop was boarded up. The yeshiva where kids once argued in Hebrew now sat empty, graffiti scratching at its bricks like time clawing to be remembered. But the synagogue on Norfolk Street still stood. Old stone, cracked glass, a door that creaked like bones every time it opened. Inside, on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky outside held the color of cold tea, a man walked in, tall, thin, shoulders bent like he'd been holding something too long. His coat was worn at the cuffs. His shoes had seen better years. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The old man who lit the candles every morning, Rabbi Goldstein, recognized him, not from newspapers, not from police reports, but from memory. The man's name was David Lenzner. Nobody ever said it loud, not in public. But those who knew, knew. David had been Louis Buchalter's cousin, distant, quiet, raised 2 buildings over from the boy they all called Lepka. He wasn't part of the life, didn't run numbers, didn't carry a piece, didn't sit at tables where power passed hands in silence. He was the one who watched, the one who saw who Louis was before the city made him into something else. And on the anniversary of his death, every year without fail, David came here, not to pray, but to light a candle. He moved to the far corner of the sanctuary. Dust hung in the air like breath that forgot to leave. He opened the brass door on the old yard-side board. It creaked. Inside, faded plaques, some names still legible, others long surrendered to time. David reached into his coat, pulled out a small white candle, unmarked, no name scratched on it. But he knew who it was for. He placed it in the lowest row, lit a match. The flame caught, trembled, then held. A flicker of gold in a world that had long since dimmed. Rabbi Goldstein approached slowly. He didn't interrupt, just stood nearby, hands clasped. "He's still in your thoughts?" he asked gently. David nodded once. He never left. He hurt a lot of people. So did the people who sent him to the chair. The rabbi didn't argue. He never did. He just said, "You knew him different." David looked at the flame, eyes distant. He was a boy once, dirty knees, always stealing fruit from Mr. Edelstein's stall, not because he was hungry, because he hated seeing anything go to waste. That boy didn't last long. He lasted longer than you'd think. Silence filled the synagogue. Not empty silence. Sacred silence. The kind that presses on the ribs but doesn't suffocate. The kind that lets you breathe a memory instead of speak it. David stared at the candle. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the devil either. He just never got to stop playing the role the city gave him. Goldstein sat down beside him. They say he never asked for forgiveness. He didn't think he deserved it. Do you think he did? David didn't answer for a long time. Then, "I think forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about remembering the person before the mistake swallowed them whole." The candle burned quietly. The wind outside pushed at the windows but didn't come in. David leaned forward, elbows on knees, fingers knotted like old rope. He used to hum when he walked. Did you know that? The rabbi shook his head. Off key, every time, same tune, over and over, like he was trying to remind himself there was music somewhere in the world. A long pause. "I didn't go to the execution," David said. "Why not?" "Because he wouldn't have wanted me to see him like that." "Did you speak before the end?" "No, but he left me something." Goldstein raised an eyebrow. "A letter?" David reached into his coat again, pulled out a small square of folded paper, yellowed by time. He handed it over. The rabbi opened it. 7 words, written in neat, measured strokes. "Light one for me, once a year." That was it. No signature, no date. But it was him. You could feel it in the weight of the ink, the humility, the finality, the quiet that followed a man his whole life, even into death. The rabbi folded it back gently, handed it to David. "You've kept your promise," David nodded. "Long as I've had breath. What happens when you don't?" David looked at the flame. It flickered again, taller this time. "Then maybe someone else will. Maybe someone will find his name in a book, or on a street sign, or whispered in a story, and wonder who he really was. You think that's enough? It's more than most men get." Outside, the sun had dipped below the rooftops. The city didn't care what happened inside that old synagogue. It kept moving. People kept working. Traffic lights kept changing. Deals were being made in towers that didn't exist when Louis was alive. But in this one quiet place, a man who'd been erased from headlines and hated by history still had a flame, still had a name, even if it wasn't spoken out loud. David stood. He stretched slowly, the years in his bones reminding him they didn't come cheap. He looked at the candle one last time, then turned to the rabbi. "Don't clean it too soon." "Of course. Let it burn." As he stepped outside, the wind hit harder, not cruel, just sharp, just alive. He pulled his coat tight, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the city that forgot the man he remembered. Inside, the rabbi sat alone. He stared at the candle, watched it burn. Then, in a voice so soft it barely existed, he whispered, "Lepke." And for one breath the flame danced, as if it heard, as if it forgave.